Welcome to the Holding Time podcast. Here we discuss breastfeeding in all its complexity, the ups and downs, the challenges and the triumphs. Whether you are expectant, a new mother, or simply interested, I hope you'll appreciate the incredible warrior women featured in this series. In this mini-series, we go back to feature some mothers who helped to shape the Holding Time project in Coventry. These interviews took place over Zoom in 2020, quite often under lockdown. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Find out more by visiting holdingtime.org or support us on our Patreon channel, Holding Time.
So my name's Anne-Marie. I've got 4 children. I've breastfed all of them for different amounts of times, and they all had different challenges and different experience with every single one of them. About you. It's this Maeve. She's nearly 3. Do you have baby milk? Yes. Do you like baby milk? Yes. I work for the local infant feeding team, but I'm also a breastfeeding counsellor with the Association of Breastfeeding Mothers, and I normally would run 2 breastfeeding groups a week and have an online page as well, Boobie Buddies, to help all the local parents if they do need help, or even just for a moan. If there's any mums that want to moan about night feeds, cluster feeding, I'm there.
So would you actually answer questions at night or no? It's during the day?
So when they come in, if I'm awake, I do answer them, because normally if they're reaching out for help, they need the help. Only if I'm asleep that I don't answer. Obviously, I won't answer then. There's normally a few messages coming in, not loads, but there is a few, and it is normally the mums that are desperate for the help that will get in touch.
And that's through Boobie Buddies. So that's really a one-woman support service that you're offering in Coventry.
Yeah. It started off as me as a friend, so it was supposed to be 2 of us. But just as it kind of got started properly, she moved. So it was just me. And it's not that. I mean, it's okay. It's more trying to keep the posts on the page. It's hard to, like, some weeks, if there's a lot going on at home and a lot going on at work, it's hard to keep the page, like the posts on the page continuously. But I enjoyed it. It's what I like doing. So it's not a burden or anything like that.
You just meet so many women in this field who are just so dedicated. And what you're doing, a lot of the organisations, when I look around the country, I find these grassroots organisations that started out like you are now. One very, very dedicated woman. In fact, I was told in Tower Hamlets that it was down to one woman that they have the highest rate of breastfeeding in the country. She just years ran her group, kept going, and sort of fought her corner and fought for breastfeeding women. And Tower Hamlets, as a result, continued to fund the services. Like, she was really instrumental in making sure that there was not just what she was providing, but also all the infrastructure around it, which is what I can see you're doing in Coventry.
There were areas where there was a gap. There were areas where it's needed and the rates are needed to increase. And the family hubs are probably, well, there is a bit of stigma around the family hubs and the children's centres, whatever they want to be called. They've kind of got it already set up. The families that need help and support normally go there anyway, or already on their radar, but they can signpost them to me.
Who would you say was most instrumental in helping you breastfeed?
I think although I have access to support, like the infant feeding team, I've had midwives, they've been good, but I'd probably say the support from my mum and my husband was probably what kept me going through the hardest times. My mum never fed any, like, she bottle fed all of us. So for her, it was like a brand new thing that even she was learning when I was feeding Neve. It probably helped that Neve was quite easy to feed. But then when I had Dermot, I had some trouble with Dermot. She was the one that sat there. Okay, she probably couldn't help me with positioning and attachment and latching on correctly. But she was the one that sat there saying, you can do this, don't give up. carry on, which she is probably the reason I carried on most of the time. Cheerleader in the corner.
It's amazing that she herself didn't breastfeed, but then was such an advocate for you. What do you think influenced her? Like, why do you think that her mind was so set on it?
I don't know.
Was it watching you?
Probably. I think she could see how different it was, although they're still getting fed, I think she would always comment how like Neve would hardly ever get poorly, how she was always so happy like having her milk, how it was so much easier not having to sterilise, and I think it kind of opened her mind to how different it was in a good way, like breastfeeding was to formula. I think she tried to breastfeed my sister, but it didn't work out. I think she had a bad experience with one of the midwives who was like, no, she's not breastfeeding, just give her a bottle. And that was like the day she was born. So for her, I don't think she wanted that to happen with me, because she could see how much I wanted to do it.
And, you know, the other thing is that's not spoken about, wasn't spoken about at the time, was the women who wanted to breastfeed, who, you know, perhaps couldn't for logistical reasons. Like, for example, babies, when I was born, were taken off mothers and weren't allowed to sleep in the bed with them, weren't even allowed to be next to the bed.
Yeah.
So those mothers, I think, possibly felt and maybe buried a lot of grief about that.
Yeah. She always says that she tried to breathe, and I think she did deep down. I think if the nurses would have just left her, she would have breastfed her. And it probably, that's probably a conversation I want to have with Mom actually now.
I'm wondering if you have fulfilled something that was left very unfulfilled in her, you know?
Yeah. Because I think she tried to go with my brother, but then they were really funny about her, like, feeding my brother as well. And in the end, she was like, what's the point? They maybe helping me helped her, like, get over that in a way.
I think that's a really nice thought for all the women now who haven't been able to breastfeed their children, that there is still a possibility of, in the future.
There's a quote I share quite a lot on my page about how breastfeeding your babies, like, is great, but helping them to breastfeed their baby is like the next level. It's just lovely.
Mm. What about your husband? What was his take on it?
So I think at first, because his family were formula feeders, I don't think any of them breastfed either. So he was very much, when I was pregnant with Neve, as my eldest, I think she was a bit like, you want what? He kind of warmed up to the idea, but I think for him, he wanted to feed her himself children out. But one I think there was other things he could do. It weren't as bad, and watching me feed her and her growing just from my milk, kind of, he could see that it weren't a bad thing, it was a good thing.
So when you had trouble with your second child, was he there encouraging you? I mean, was he as sold on it as your mum?
So especially at night times, it was just me and him. He'd be like, just carry on. It's Lauren. And I think I tried, because obviously Maliki had the cleft. So there was times I struggled with him as well. I remember the nurse come round before he was born. I said about breastfeeding, and the nurse was very much like, you won't be able to breastfeed him. Like, he's got a cleft palate. And I was absolutely in a state. I was heartbroken. And I remember Mark sitting there like, she's a breastfeeding counsellor, so I think she'll find a way of getting around that. So, yeah. And I'd always look back and think, it's a good job we said that, because I was just like, oh my God, well, how could she say this to me?
That's so lovely that he had so much faith in you, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think when you're really vulnerable, even if you're a really experienced mother, when you're in that state of vulnerability, late stage pregnancy, anyone can make you cry, can't they?
Yeah.
If they tell you can't do it, because you yourself still don't really, you're so anxious, aren't you?
And if someone's telling you can't do something, it's kind of telling you already you're going to fail. And that's not what you want to hear. It's not what you want to hear as a mom.
And what was it in the beginning then? If you weren't breastfed and your husband wasn't breastfed, what was it that made you try breastfeeding?
So I was pregnant at 19, so I was at uni, and my friend was pregnant at the same time. We were literally due just weeks apart. And I remember I hadn't even thought of breastfeeding. It hasn't even entered my mind. And she come into uni one day, she was going on about how she's going to breastfeed because it helps you lose weight. And I was like, that is a brilliant plan. I'm just going to do it. And I remember looking at all the other benefits and thinking, oh, there's actually quite a lot of benefits here. This could be good. Same just saying didn't help me lose weight. But it gave me all the other benefits. And it kind of changed. I'd say it has changed for life, because if I hadn't breastfed Neve, then I wouldn't have breastfed Dermot and met all the other mums at the groups, and I wouldn't have become a breastfeeding counsellor. I wouldn't have got into the job I'm doing now. None of that would have happened.
Yeah, because you were so young, I suppose. I mean, I think lots of women have an experience of motherhood that's totally transformational, but because their lives are so established, they almost have to work against it all the time, like push against it, because you were so young, you could just go with it, couldn't you?
Yeah. And I suppose my degree probably was wasted, but it's not like I've wasted it and come out with nothing. I've built up Boobie Buddies. I'm doing something that's worthwhile. The kids have got the benefit of breastfeeding. I've got the benefit of breastfeeding.
In terms of like cancer protection, isn't it 8 years for every year that you breastfeed?
Yeah.
That's you for the rest of your life, isn't it?
Yeah.
Covered.
I'm sorted.
I forget what your degree was in.
It was forensic science and criminal justice.
I knew it was something really
different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a scientific background, isn't it?
Yeah. Hello.
The other question that I always ask everyone is, where do you feel most comfortable breastfeeding? What environment do you feel most comfortable breastfeeding within?
That's a hard one, because I'm one of these, doesn't matter where I am, whack it out.
Were you always like that?
No. Not
when you were young?
No, with Neve I wouldn't. I'd time it so that I'd feed her, then go out. Dermot, I was probably a bit better, but I'd still be very much like, he'd be covered, we'd all be covered. I think with Malachi, once it got to Malachi, knowing that he needed feeding, and that was the most important thing.
So where do you feel most comfortable breastfeeding?
I think I feel comfortable anywhere. Probably most comfortable at home, because you can just, especially with Maeve at the minute, she's like an acrobat who wants to feed in every position she can think of and twist and turn. So it's probably not the best if I'm out not like I'm going to a cafe and that at the minute, but in a cafe and that she wants to feed herself. Charlie going to sit still. So probably at home at the minute, but anywhere. I don't mind feeding anywhere.
What is it like, say, for example, in a cafe in Coventry, breastfeeding?
I don't think I've had a bad experience in the sense of someone coming up to me and saying anything. I remember when I was pregnant with Malachi, Dermot was still feeding then. He would have been about two and a half. And I remember he wanted to feed, and obviously I had a bump trying to feed Dermot. And I remember someone giving me a really easy look, and I thought, go away, because I'm likely to say something. That's the only bad thing that's ever happened. I'd say most of the time, some people might glance over, smile, or glance and quickly look away to realise what you're doing. But I don't think there's many people that would say anything.
It's interesting to me because, you know, I live in Brighton, and I mean, in Brighton, women just go. I have seen a woman in a restaurant with her whole top up and both boobs out, and I was like, well, that's a first. You know, even for me, I find that quite a lot of a bit of an eyeful.
When they were younger, not so much for me, but with the others, if we were going shopping and they wanted feeding, I would walk around the shops. My mum would push the trolley for me and I'd be feeding, and people would look then. No one would ever say anything, but they'd look more then.
When I was breastfeeding, and I mean, I think the place I felt most awkward was on the bus for some reason. I think because on the bus, there's a lot of older people, and they're all sitting there, and they're, I'd be sitting in the front of the downstairs, possibly breastfeeding a toddler. That's where I would experience some almost like, this is our territory, what are you doing that for? But of course you're sitting down, and it's a good opportunity for a child to have a feed. But at the time I remember thinking, well, let them look, because in a way, if they don't see it, they're never going to get used to it, are they?
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I think it's really important for younger people to see it as well. Actually, I just remembered now, when we were out somewhere, there was a child, I was feeding one of them, and there was a child come over, and they were staring, which to me wasn't an issue, but I remember their mum being like, don't stare. But they were really like, but what's she doing? What's the baby doing? The mum obviously didn't want to say it, but I was very much like, well, they're just having their milk. And I thought, at least that child is then going to go then and ask their mum these questions. Whether the mum responds positively or negatively, at least that child then seen it, been exposed to breastfeeding, and it's going to start a conversation up there.
Well, that event has normalised breastfeeding.
Yeah.
It's so early that has made it normal, because that's an early experience, and children are so open-minded, it's completely received without judgment what they're seeing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that will have a benefit to them, especially if it's a girl, in terms of potentially their own breastfeeding experience. Because I really noticed, talking to women, that the women who've never seen anyone breastfeed do seem to have a harder time. There does seem to be a correlation between never having actually seen someone breastfeed and going through a lot more anxiety about breastfeeding, which obviously doesn't help with letdown and everything. If you're kind of like, what am I doing? Like that sort of disorientation that comes with breastfeeding for the first time. It's really lessened if you had a best friend you breastfed, or a sister, or, a cousin, or if you just were able to sit and watch someone breastfeed in your life, it seems like it's a lot easier to do it. I mean, it's like if you've never made a cake, if your mum cooks, even if you never cooked with her, if you saw her cook, then it's a lot easier to just give it a go, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we learn a lot by watching.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that, because obviously mine have been exposed to breastfeeding. I mean, they've had cousins that are bottle fed, but they're more likely to pick up one of their dolls and try to breastfeed it than bottle feed it, because they've seen me do it and they've been breastfed. I'd like to think, like, even for my nieces, and I say nephews, but I mean, I'm more to the support their wives or girlfriends or whatever. But I'm hoping that it can have an impact on them as well. Keep their mind open to the possibility of it's not just bottle feeding babies.
So you're a cultural influence on our new generation.
Hoping.
Were you an influence on any of your siblings?
So my brother's got 2 little girls, and his girlfriend, she did try to breastfeed, but one of them was like a pregnant baby. So there was a lot of pressure from the hospital to get baby fed to get discharged. But she did give it a go, which I see that as a good thing. And then my other sister that's got a child, she breastfed him. And I like to think that's from a bit of watching me and seeing that it's possible, you can do it. Not as bad as what some people make out it could be.
Yeah. Well, I suppose we're trying to bring about great change, but it's one mother at a time, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you have a mother who manages to breastfeed 4 children over a really long period of time, over all those years, you think of how many journeys, how many times you've breastfed in public, how many people have seen you. You've actually had this massive cultural influence that just by doing it, you don't even realize, like, that invisible it's real power. It's like the way that graffiti works. So many people walk past, that message on the street has massive influence, as much as an ad on telly, because so many thousands of people see it. And so I think also people are more influenced by each other than they are by other cultural messages.
Exactly. They're a bit like weaning. I think when I look at weaning the kids, I gave Neve solid food it was way too early. I think she was just 16 weeks old. And that was based on how my mum and mother-in-law weaned us. And then, like during that Maliki and Maeve, I kind of learned afterwards that they need to wait till they're ready. Because of, although I think a lot of people look at the guidance and the scientific stuff and they're like, oh, that doesn't matter. That's not what my mum did. That's not what my auntie did. So they just go by their family norm or their cultural norm.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone involved, our funders, the Infant Feeding Team and University Hospital Coventry and Warwick for their support, along with all the amazing mothers and partners who helped to make this project happen. You can learn more about the project by visiting holdingtime.org and support us on our Patreon channel. There's a link in the description. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like, follow or subscribe so you don't miss any of our content.